We don't tolerate failure here. You're done. Get out now before I make you regret ever stepping foot in this building.
The room went quiet the moment her manager raised his voice. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet that followed gossip, but the sharp, cutting silence that made every breath feel too loud. She stood there with her bag half-zipped, one hand still holding her phone, eyes fixed on the carpet like it might swallow her whole if she stared hard enough. "You're late," he said again, louder this time, as if repetition turned accusation into truth. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. The explanation pressed painfully against her chest, desperate to be heard. The bus had broken down. Her sister's shift had run late. The daycare had threatened another warning. None of it mattered now. He didn't ask. He didn't care. "You think the rules don't apply to you," he continued, pacing in front of the conference table where everyone else sat stiffly, pretending not to look at her while listening to every word. "This isn't charity. We don't wait for people who can't manage their own lives." Her cheeks burned. She felt it, that familiar heat of shame, the one that crept up whenever someone spoke to her like she was small, careless, replaceable. She had learned to carry it quietly over the years, learned how to nod, apologize, accept. Survival had taught her that resistance only made things worse. "I can explain," she said softly. Her voice sounded wrong in her own ears. Too thin. Too hopeful. He laughed. Not loud. Just enough to sting. "I'm not interested in excuses." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone cleared their throat. No one spoke. No one met her eyes. The words came next, sharp and final. "You're fired." For a second, she didn't understand them. Fired happened to other people. People with savings. People with safety nets. People who could afford a bad day. The word echoed in her head, hollow and unreal, like it belonged to a different life. "You can clear your desk now," he added, already turning away as if she were finished, as if she had never mattered enough to deserve another glance. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. She waited. For someone to interrupt. For someone to say something. For a miracle she knew better than to expect. Nothing happened. The silence pressed down harder than the shouting had. It told her everything she already knew. That she was alone. That this was normal. That humiliation was just another cost of being poor, of being invisible, of needing this job more than it needed her. She took one step back, then another. Each movement felt slow, heavy, like walking through water. The conference room door seemed impossibly far away. Every pair of eyes stayed carefully unfocused as she passed, fixed on notebooks, phones, the polished surface of the table. She wondered, distantly, how she would explain this at home. How she would stretch the last paycheck. How many nights she could lie awake calculating numbers that never worked in her favor. Fear curled low in her stomach, familiar and relentless. At the door, she paused. Not because she wanted to, but because some small, stubborn part of her still hoped someone would stop her. Say her name. Ask what happened. Acknowledge that she was a person, not a problem to be removed. No one did. She stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her, sealing the moment like a verdict. Her reflection in the glass wall looked smaller than she felt, shoulders drawn in, eyes dulled by exhaustion she could never quite sleep away. She told herself not to cry. Not here. Not where someone might see and decide she deserved that too. Tears were a luxury. She had learned that early. As she walked, she replayed the scene again and again, searching for the moment she could have fixed, the word she could have said differently. The truth hurt more than the memory. It wouldn't have changed anything. Back in the conference room, the meeting resumed. Voices rose. Chairs scraped. Life went on without her. She reached the elevator and pressed the button, jaw tight, breathing measured. This was how it always happened. Quietly. Publicly. Without ceremony. She didn't know that someone had been watching. She didn't know that her name had already been learned, memorized, carried in someone else's silence. And she didn't know that this was the last moment she would ever walk away believing she was invisible. If you've ever been judged without being heard, you're not alone. Share your thoughts below. The elevator doors slid shut with a muted sound, and only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding. It came out shaky, uneven, like her body had been bracing for something that never arrived. The descent felt longer than it should have. Each passing floor was another reminder that she was going down while everyone else stayed exactly where they were. When the doors opened in the lobby, the noise rushed back in. Phones ringing. Shoes clicking against polished floors. Laughter from somewhere near the reception desk. The world hadn't paused for her humiliation. It never did. She adjusted her bag again, fingers brushing the edge of a worn notebook inside. Rent numbers. Grocery lists. Childcare reminders. Her life reduced to calculations she was already rearranging in her head. Fired meant no paycheck. No paycheck meant choices she couldn't afford to make. Outside, the city air hit her face, cool and sharp. She welcomed it. It grounded her. The building behind her gleamed with glass and steel, tall and untouchable, like it had nothing to do with her anymore. Maybe it never really had. She started walking, not toward any particular place, just away. Away from the conference room. Away from the silence. Away from the version of herself that had stood there waiting for permission to speak. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A reminder notification she'd set weeks ago. Pick up by 6. She swallowed hard. Her sister was covering today, but favors like that ran out quickly. Everyone she loved was already stretched thin. She crossed the street when the light changed, feet moving automatically. The noise of traffic blurred into a dull hum. Her thoughts grew louder instead. Late. That was all they'd heard. Not tired. Not overwhelmed. Not trying. Just late. She thought of the mornings that started before sunrise. Of packing lunches while half asleep. Of standing at bus stops with a knot in her stomach, praying nothing went wrong. She had built her life on precision because chaos cost her more than it cost others. Still, it hadn't been enough. She reached a small park a few blocks away and sat on the edge of a low concrete wall. The city rushed past, but here, she could breathe for a moment. She stared at the ground, counting cracks in the pavement, grounding herself the way she'd learned to do on bad days. This was what invisibility felt like. Not just being ignored, but being disposable. Like her absence would never be noticed. Like her presence had only been tolerated until it became inconvenient. She wondered how many people in that room would remember her name tomorrow. Probably none. She had learned not to expect permanence in places that only valued her labor. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from her sister. Did you make it to work? Her fingers hovered over the screen. She typed, erased, typed again. Something happened. I'll explain later. She didn't add the truth. Not yet. Saying it out loud made it real in a way she wasn't ready for. She stood, brushing dust from her palms, and started walking again. She needed to keep moving. Stillness invited thoughts she couldn't afford. As she passed a cafe window, she caught her reflection. Tired eyes. Shoulders slightly hunched. A woman who looked older than her years because she'd learned too early how fragile everything was. She straightened instinctively, even though no one was watching. Dignity was something she practiced, not something she'd been given. Back at the office building, behind tinted glass and closed doors, the meeting carried on. No one mentioned her again. To them, the issue had been resolved. But someone else sat quietly at the far end of the table, hands folded, expression unreadable. He had not looked away when she spoke. Had not checked his phone when the manager raised his voice. He had noticed the way her shoulders tightened, the way her eyes searched the room before dropping to the floor. He had noticed her. She didn't know his name. Didn't know his reputation. Didn't know that power recognized powerlessness the way predators recognized fear. Or that silence, in some people, was not indifference, but calculation. She walked toward the bus stop, heart heavy, already planning the conversation she dreaded most. The one where she would have to admit she'd failed again, even though she had done everything right. The bus arrived late. She almost laughed at the irony. Instead, she stepped on and found a seat by the window. The city slid by in fragments of color and motion. For the first time since the words had been spoken, tears blurred her vision. She let them fall quietly, wiping them away before they could draw attention. Crying didn't mean giving up. It meant she was still human. She rested her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. Bills would still exist. Responsibilities would still wait. What she didn't know was that tomorrow would not look the way she expected. That the silence she walked away with was not the end of her story. And that somewhere behind her, a decision had already been made. The conference room had settled back into its rhythm, the kind that pretended nothing uncomfortable had just happened. Papers were shuffled. A presentation resumed. Voices slipped into professional tones again, smooth and practiced. The manager leaned back in his chair, satisfied, already moving on to the next problem that needed fixing. At the far end of the table, a man sat perfectly still. He had arrived early, taken the seat that allowed him to see everyone without being seen himself. Dark suit. No tie. Calm posture. The kind of presence that didn't announce itself but quietly claimed space. People had noticed him when he walked in, even if they couldn't explain why. He hadn't spoken once. He replayed the moment in his head. The way her fingers tightened around her phone. The pause before she spoke. The softness in her voice when she asked to explain. Most people miss details like that. He never did. He had seen humiliation before. Not the loud kind that came with shouting and chaos, but the controlled kind. The kind delivered with a smile and rules and a room full of witnesses who stayed silent because silence was safer. The manager's voice droned on about deadlines. No one noticed when the man at the end of the table slowly placed his hands on the surface in front of him. Fingers spread. Palms flat. Grounded. He thought of the first time he'd learned what power really was. Not force. Not money. Not fear. Power was deciding when to speak and when not to. He stood. The sound was subtle. A chair shifting back. But it cut through the room anyway. Conversations faltered. A few heads turned instinctively, drawn by something they couldn't name. The manager stopped mid-sentence. "Is there a problem?" he asked, irritation already edging his tone. He wasn't used to being interrupted. The man didn't answer right away. He straightened his jacket slowly, deliberately, as if time belonged to him alone. Then he looked directly at the manager for the first time. "Yes," he said calmly. His voice was low, controlled. Not loud. It didn't need to be. "There is." The room froze. People shifted in their seats. A few glanced at each other, uncertain. No one had expected this meeting to go anywhere unexpected. Definitely not here. Definitely not now. "You dismissed her," the man continued, eyes steady. "Without asking a single question." The manager frowned. "This is an internal matter." The man tilted his head slightly, considering that. "No," he said. "It isn't." There was a weight behind the words that made the air feel heavier. The kind of weight that didn't come from anger, but from certainty. Someone near the middle of the table swallowed. Another person sat up straighter, suddenly aware of their posture. The manager forced a thin smile. "I don't see how this concerns you." The man finally allowed a hint of expression to cross his face. Not amusement. Not anger. Something colder. Something sharper. "You said her being late showed a lack of discipline," he said. "You assumed incompetence. You didn't ask why." He paused. Just long enough. Do you know her name? The question landed harder than any accusation. The manager hesitated. It was barely noticeable, but in that room, it was everything. That's not relevant. The man's gaze didn't waver. Say her name. Silence stretched. Every person in the room felt it. The demand wasn't aggressive, but it was absolute. This wasn't a request. It was a line being drawn. The manager cleared his throat. I don't see. Her name, the man repeated. Still calm. Still quiet. The manager looked down at the folder in front of him, flipping pages that suddenly felt too thin to protect him. He didn't find what he was looking for. The man inhaled slowly. Then he spoke. He said her name. Cleanly. Correctly. Without hesitation. It echoed in the room, familiar and strange at the same time, like hearing something private spoken aloud. A few people's eyes widened. Someone sucked in a breath. The man continued, voice steady. She has not been late once in the last 8 months. She covers shifts no one else wants. She stays quiet when spoken over. She does her job without complaint. He took a step forward, just one. It was enough. You embarrassed her, he said. Publicly. And you did it because you thought no one would object. The manager's face flushed. This is inappropriate. The man leaned forward slightly, hands resting on the table now. What's inappropriate is mistaking silence for agreement. No one spoke. No one moved. The power in the room had shifted, slow but undeniable, like gravity changing direction. People felt it in their chests, in the way their attention bent toward the man standing so calmly at the end of the table. He straightened again, smoothing his jacket. She's not fired, he said simply. The manager stared at him. You don't have that authority. The man's eyes flicked briefly to the rest of the room. To the executives who suddenly avoided his gaze. To the ones who knew exactly who he was, even if they'd hoped he wouldn't involve himself. I do, he said. The silence that followed was different from the one she had walked away with. This silence was heavy with understanding. With fear. With respect. The man glanced toward the door she had disappeared through earlier. His expression softened, just barely. She was never invisible, he said. You just weren't important enough to notice her. He turned back to the room. We'll be revisiting how this company treats people who don't think they're allowed to speak. No one argued. Moments later, as the meeting dissolved into stunned quiet, the man picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. He said her name again, under his breath this time. And stood to follow. She was 2 blocks away when her phone rang. She almost ignored it. The day had already taken enough from her, and answering calls felt like inviting more weight onto shoulders that were already aching. But when she glanced at the screen, the number wasn't one she recognized. For a moment, panic flickered. Debt collectors. HR paperwork. Another reminder of everything she'd just lost. She answered anyway. Hello? Please don't hang up, a calm male voice said immediately. Controlled. Steady. Not rushed. I know this call is unexpected. She stopped walking. I'm calling about what happened today, he continued. About the meeting. Her grip tightened on the phone. If this is about paperwork, It isn't, he interrupted gently. Not sharply. Not dismissively. Just enough to make her pause. You didn't do anything wrong. Those words landed harder than the firing had. She closed her eyes. For a second, the street noise faded. Who is this? She asked quietly. My name doesn't matter yet, he replied. What matters is that you were humiliated publicly, without cause. And that silence allowed it to happen. Her throat tightened. She swallowed. I don't understand. You will, he said. But first, I need you to stop walking. She did. There's a cafe on the corner ahead of you, he went on, as if he could see her. Glass windows. Green awning. Her breath caught. She looked up. It was there. I'm inside. Her heart started to pound. Logic told her to hang up. To keep moving. To protect herself the way she always had. But something in his voice, unrushed, certain, held her in place. She pushed the door open. The warmth hit her first. The smell of coffee. Soft music humming in the background. Then she saw him. He was seated near the window, posture relaxed, dark coat draped neatly over the back of the chair beside him. He looked exactly like he had in the meeting. Composed. Unbothered. Dangerous in the quiet way. He stood when he saw her. That small gesture undid her more than the firing had. No one stood for her. No one ever had. You don't have to sit if you don't want to, he said. I just wanted you to hear the truth before anyone else rewrites it. She hesitated, then took the chair across from him. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. You knew my name, she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Yes. Why? Because I pay attention. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. That hasn't helped me much. It will, he replied. From now on. She searched his face for mockery. For pity. There was none. Just intent. The man who fired you assumed you were replaceable, he continued. He assumed no one important would object. Her shoulders tensed. I don't need revenge. I know, he said. That's why I'm here. He reached into his jacket and placed a slim folder on the table between them. He didn't push it toward her. Didn't open it. Just let it exist. I wasn't attending that meeting as an observer, he said. I was there because this company is about to change ownership. Her breath caught. You're what? She whispered. I acquire companies that forget the value of people, he said calmly. And I dismantle cultures that rely on fear and silence. Her mind struggled to catch up. So, you did that because of me? No, he said, shaking his head slightly. I did it because of what happened to you. There's a difference. She stared at him, heart racing. You don't even know me. I know enough, he replied. I know you didn't defend yourself when you could have. I know you walked out with dignity instead of anger. And I know that kind of restraint usually comes from someone who's had to survive without protection. Her eyes burned. You don't get to disappear today, he went on. Not quietly. Not unfairly. She shook her head, overwhelmed. I can't afford this. Whatever this is. He leaned back slightly. I'm not offering charity. Then what are you offering? A choice, he said. Come back tomorrow. Not as someone begging for a job. But as someone whose voice will be heard. She laughed softly, disbelief edged with fear. That sounds like a trap. Only if you think being seen is dangerous, he replied. She looked down at the folder. Her name was printed on the tab. What's inside? She asked. An explanation, he said. And an apology. Official. Public. The kind that makes silence impossible. Her fingers hovered over it but didn't open it. Why me? She asked finally. The question she'd been carrying for years. There are people worse off than I am. Yes, he agreed. And they're watching too. What happens to you will tell them whether this place is worth staying in. She looked up at him again. For the first time, she noticed the weariness beneath his control. The weight of someone who carried responsibility the way others carried fear. You don't save people, she said quietly. No, he replied. I make room for them to stand. The truth settled slowly, heavy and real. This wasn't a miracle. It was a reckoning. She inhaled deeply. If I come back, it won't be the same. He allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. It was never supposed to be. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that something had already shifted. She placed her hand on the folder. For the first time that day, the ground beneath her felt steady. She didn't open the folder right away. She carried it home like something fragile, tucked carefully against her chest, as if sudden movement might shatter whatever fragile possibility it contained. The bus ride felt different this time. Not lighter, just sharper. Every thought cut deeper because now there was something at stake. At home, the apartment greeted her with familiar quiet. Shoes by the door. A folded blanket on the couch. The soft hum of the refrigerator. This place had seen every version of her, tired, hopeful, defeated, and asked for nothing in return. She set the folder on the small kitchen table and stood there for a long moment, staring at it. Papers had power. She knew that. Contracts, notices, warnings, ink had a way of changing lives without asking permission. She finally sat and opened it. The first page wasn't legal language. It wasn't a threat. It was a letter. It acknowledged the incident. Not vaguely. Not carefully. It named the humiliation for what it was. Public misconduct. Abuse of authority. Failure of leadership. Her breath caught as she read her own name printed there again, this time with respect instead of accusation. The next pages laid out changes. Immediate ones. Policy revisions. Accountability measures. And then, near the end, a single page that made her hands go cold. A role. A real one. Not a favor. Not a placeholder. A position with authority, oversight, input, the ability to speak without asking permission first. She pushed the folder away, heart pounding. It was too much. Too fast. Her instinct screamed the same warning it always had. Don't draw attention. Don't stand out. Don't reach for things that can be taken away. She thought of the manager's voice. Of the room full of people who hadn't said a word. Of how small she'd felt walking out. She also thought of the man in the cafe. Not the power he held, but the way he'd used it. Quietly. Precisely. Without asking for gratitude. The phone buzzed beside her. A single message. You don't need to decide tonight. She exhaled slowly. He had meant it when he said choice. Sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the city breathe through the window. Every argument played out in her head. The practical ones. The fearful ones. The hopeful ones she didn't trust. Taking the offer meant visibility. Scrutiny. Risk. Refusing it meant going back to the familiar grind. Another job. Another boss. Another version of the same silence. By morning, she was exhausted, but clear. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that made her feel like herself rather than someone she was trying to impress. When she stepped outside, the air felt different. Not kinder. Just honest. The building loomed ahead of her again, all glass and angles. Yesterday, it had felt like a place that rejected her. Today, it felt like a test. Inside, the lobby buzzed as usual. But when she walked past reception, the guard nodded. Not because she was important, but because she belonged. The conference room was already full when she entered. This time, no one ignored her. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The manager was there, stiff-backed, eyes fixed straight ahead. He didn't look at her. The man stood when she reached the table. You came, he said simply. Yes, she replied. Her voice didn't shake. He gestured for her to sit, not beside him, but across from the others. Centered. Visible. He didn't speak for a moment. Let the room adjust. Let them feel it. Yesterday, he said, a decision was made in this room that reflected more than a scheduling issue. It reflected a culture. No one interrupted. Today, he continued, we're correcting that. He turned to her. If you're willing. She felt every eye on her. The old fear stirred, but it didn't win. I am, she said. The words settled into the space between them, solid and real. He nodded once, satisfied. Then he addressed the room again. She'll explain what changes need to happen. And why. A year ago, a month ago, even yesterday morning, that would have been impossible. But something had shifted, not just around her, but inside her. She spoke. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She described. The systems that punished lateness without context. The silence that protected authority instead of people. The cost of treating employees like they were endlessly replaceable. As she spoke, she realized something startling. They were listening. Not all of them. Not equally. But enough. When she finished, the room was quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't cruel. It was thoughtful. The meeting ended without applause. Without drama. Just action points and follow-ups and a clear understanding that something irreversible had begun. As people filed out, a few stopped to speak to her. Some awkward. Some sincere. One whispered apology she hadn't known she needed. The manager left last, shoulders rigid. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His power had already been answered. In the hallway, she stood beside the man who had changed the trajectory of her life by standing up. I don't know if I can do this perfectly, she said quietly. He glanced at her. Perfect isn't the requirement. What is? Honesty, he replied. And the courage to stay visible. She nodded, absorbing that. As they walked toward the exit, she felt it fully for the first time. Not triumph. Not revenge. Agency. Outside, the city felt the same, but she didn't. She had chosen something unfamiliar. Something risky. Something real. And she knew, deep down, that whatever came next, she would never walk away believing she was invisible again. The weeks that followed did not feel like a fairy tale. They felt like work. Real work. The kind that required presence instead of survival, honesty instead of silence. She learned quickly that being seen did not mean being carried. It meant being expected to stand. Her new role came with responsibility that sat heavy on her shoulders at first. Meetings where people paused before speaking, unsure how to treat her now. Emails copied to her name for the first time. Decisions that required her input, and consequences that followed them. Some days, she went home exhausted in a way she had never known. Not from running, but from holding space. Still, the fear that once lived in her chest began to loosen its grip. He did not hover. He did not interfere. He did not rescue. That was the first thing she noticed. He stayed in the background, present but restrained, stepping in only when systems resisted change with teeth instead of words. When he spoke, people listened. When he didn't, they still felt him. And yet, when they crossed paths, in hallways, at the elevator, in brief moments between obligations, there was something unspoken there. Recognition. Mutual respect. The quiet understanding of two people who had learned power from opposite ends of the spectrum. One evening, after a long day, she found him standing by the window in the empty conference room. The city lights reflected faintly against the glass, blurring his outline into the skyline. You stayed late, she said. So did you, he replied. She hesitated, then spoke. You could have taken control. You didn't. He turned to face her fully. Control isn't protection. She nodded slowly. It used to feel like the same thing. It does when you've never had a choice, he said. The words landed gently, but they struck deep. She crossed her arms loosely. People assume I owe you. His expression sharpened, not with anger, but with clarity. You don't. I know, she said. But they don't. Let them be wrong, he replied. I didn't step in to own the outcome. I stepped in to stop the harm. She studied him then, really studied him. The stillness. The restraint. The discipline behind every action. He carried power like a responsibility, not a weapon. Why? She asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out at the city again. Because once, he said, someone stood up for me when it was dangerous to do so. They didn't save me. They reminded me I wasn't alone. She felt something shift between them. Not romance. Not yet. Something steadier. Choice. Time passed. The office changed slowly, imperfectly. Not everyone welcomed it. A few left. Others adapted. She learned how to speak without apologizing and listen without shrinking. One afternoon, she received an invitation, dinner, off-site, optional. She read it twice, pulse quickening despite herself. She found him waiting at a small restaurant, nothing extravagant. No entourage. No spectacle. I wanted neutral ground, he said as they sat. I appreciate that, she replied honestly. They talked, not about work, not about power, but about small things. Music. Childhood memories. The exhaustion of always being strong. Laughter came easily, surprising them both. At one point, she said, you never asked anything in return. He met her gaze steadily. I don't take loyalty I didn't earn. Her chest tightened. That's rare. So is trust, he said. When the night ended, he walked her to her door but didn't follow her inside. He didn't assume. He didn't claim. He waited. She paused before stepping away. You know, she said, this only works if I keep choosing it. That's the only way it should, he replied. Months later, when people spoke about her, it wasn't in whispers or pity. It was with recognition. Respect. She had not been elevated because someone powerful wanted her. She had risen because someone powerful had made room and then stepped back. One evening, as she stood at the window of her apartment, city lights glowing below, her phone buzzed with a message. You still choosing this? She smiled softly as she typed back. Every day. She understood it now. Protection without possession. Presence without control. Power that did not demand silence in return. Being chosen did not mean being owned. It meant being seen and staying. And if stories about dignity, quiet strength, and being chosen without losing yourself feel like home to you, then you belong here too.